All right. Hello, everybody. Let's get started. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of GitaCloud and SAP. My name is Günther Schmidt. I'm a principal with GitaCloud, and I will be your moderator. We have a great turnout again today from around the globe, and we put some very interesting material together for you. The topic today is IBP for demand, and this webinar is brought to you by GitaCloud and SAP. This is the second webinar this year after we covered order-based supply planning in February. At GitaCloud, we're very passionate about enabling digital supply chain. We're proud to be delivering training and enabling the latest capabilities for our customers, always focused and committed to deliver measurable business results. As you may have noticed, forecasting and planning, especially in the consumer product industry, has become ever more challenging over the last 3 years. Demand is becoming increasingly more volatile, and traditional statistical forecasting is no longer enough. Demand sensing and shaping play a key role in dealing with short-term demand volatility. We're pleased to present the SAP IBP for demand solution today that is at the leading edge of enabling demand sensing and shaping capabilities. We will focus on new capabilities in 1802 IBP demand, like the ARIMA model, lag-based snapshots, and retail POS-based demand sensing, among others, in our GitaCloud system demo. So please kick back and enjoy. Couple housekeeping items before we jump in. All attendee microphones will stay muted for the entire time. The webinar is going to be recorded, and we will send you a link. Please submit your questions anytime during the webinar. You can use the GoToWebinar Q&A section to ask your questions. We will then try to answer them real time, so please review the log. You might have your answer already waiting for you from somebody else's question. We will follow up towards the end, one-on-one, after the webinar for questions we're unable to cover here. Lastly, please complete the exit survey, which should automatically pop up when you are exiting the GoToMeeting session. Okay, we have a great panel for you today. It's my pleasure to welcome Anand Doraiswamy from Dabur International. Dabur International supply chain caters to more than 100 countries with more than 1,000 products. Anand is head of supply chain for Dabur International. He is based in Dubai. I would also like to welcome Dr. Ramesh Bollapragada. Dr. Ramesh has been a key advisor with GitaCloud since its inception 3 years back. He's the director of College of Business at San Francisco State University. He teaches decision sciences and supply chain all over the globe. He comes from Bell Labs and is a well-known researcher in the supply chain domain. Todd Stanger is the solution owner for SAP IBP for demand in the SCM solution management team as a director at SAP America. Todd has spent more than 2 decades in supply chain planning and was heavily involved in demand forecasting side of SAP APO since its very early days. Ashish Meshram is the lead IBP consultant with GitaCloud. Ashish spent a year at SAP Labs building IBP demos prior to joining GitaCloud. Ashish led a demand forecasting pilot as well as an IBP S&OP implementation last year. Ashish is based out of India. Ashish is a hands-on expert in all applications of IBP. Ashish has led about 10 customer workshops across S&OP, demand, inventory, and also response and supply applications. All 4-day workshops. Deep Chichia is an IBP consultant with GitaCloud. Deep led an IBP S&OP implementation at a CPG company last year and is currently helping them to extend the footprint to demand. CPIDS-based integration with a non-SAP ERP system and other IBP applications down the line. Earlier, Deep led an IBP pilot to deliver forecast error reduction by 60% for another large CPG company in terms of their top 2 international markets. Deep is a hands-on expert in order-based planning and SDI integration. He also delivered proof of concept engagements for large customers in CPG and pharma. And last but not least, Ashutosh Bansal is the president and CEO of GitaCloud. Ashutosh has more than 25 years of SAP supply chain solution experience across SAP ERP, APO, and now IBP. He was at SAP for 10 years, where he played a key role since the early days of SAP IBP. Since starting GitaCloud in 2015, Ashutosh has led several IBP sales and delivery engagements across the globe. Ashutosh blogs actively on IBP topics at GitaCloud.com/blog and LinkedIn with 11,000 followers. All right, let me now walk you through the agenda. We'll first go to Anand, who will articulate the challenges with forecasting demand for Dabur International 1,000 plus products across more than 100 countries. The GitaCloud supply chain scientist team was able to showcase a tremendous reduction to the forecast error when compared to the baseline. Dr. Ramesh will present a summary of approach and results from the forecasting pilot using IBP demand at Dabur International. We'll go next to Todd, who will provide a quick overview of SAP IBP for demand. Ashish and Deep will then take you through a deep dive showcase of IBP demand planning and sensing capabilities based on the latest IBP release 1802 for about 60 minutes. Ashutosh will then wrap up the webinar by outlining next steps for you to effectively evaluate and test IBP. We will then open the floor for any final Q&A. Now, it's my pleasure to hand the baton over to Anand. Please take it away.
Hi, everyone. This is Anand Doraiswamy. I head the supply chain for Dabur International. Just to give you an overview of how the international operations is, it's wholly owned subsidiary of Dabur Group. A lot of people may know, may not. It's basically an Indian-based organization specializing in hair care, oral care, and skin care products. Now, it's also the overall turnover of around USD 1.3 billion and a market cap of more than 60,000 Indian rupees crores. So that's about the entire organization, which is about USD 9 billion. It manages a global portfolio of about 1,000 plus personal care and healthcare products, and it's been growing over the years and has presence in 100 plus countries across 5 continents. Can you please move to the next slide? Thank you. So overall, if you see the business locations across the globe, we are based in America, in Africa, in Europe, in Middle East, in North Africa as well, and a bit of Asia. Now, how does this help in this kind of presentation? It's mainly for the material movement from one location to the other, more than 10,000 items moving from Middle East to Africa, and from India to Middle East, and from Middle East to the US, and also to the Europe. So that's how the complex supply chain is all about in the international world. Next slide, please. So the current state in Dabur International is mainly related to the demand planning and the supply planning, where we have a rolling monthly demand plan from sales and marketing. It's largely a push-based primary sales model. You have a monthly dispatch and production plan from supply chain, which is on a rolling basis, rolling for the next 3 months. We have also the SAP ERP, which helps us in taking the MRP run for the raw material and the packed material procurement. Factory planners then develop the detailed factory schedule at a line level and then deliver the products. Next slide. So the current challenges which we face are in number. The first mainly being that forecasting is not through a comprehensive automated system. It's largely through an Excel-based calculation and the gut feel by the sales team. Month-end primary sales internal push, squeeze, and distorts the true demand consumption, leading to a low forecast accuracy and a low fidelity. The promotion calendar for the quarter is not frozen, hence leading to a last-minute rush. That's because of a last-minute demand from the market or the competition. High demand whiplash month to month, leading to either excess or low inventory. Low ability to systematically sense demand and hence drive the supply chain. So demand is largely related to the gut feel of the sales manager and no statistics or science behind it. And that's also the case with the new product demand. Continuing on the challenges, next slide, please. There has been, in the recent past, there has been increase in the challenges related to sudden irregularities in the historical data. That's mainly due to the currency fluctuations in the region. Also related to the geopolitical issues in the last year, which has made the forecasting difficult for the sales team, also for the supply chain team. And now, as I said earlier, that there was a lot of Excel-based calculation. Hence, there are many data files. So there's a lot of data files. Data is available in different subset of SKUs for the same country. Hence, it is difficult to clean and organize the data, and hence take actions. The effect of promotions was not included as there was a lack of information. Both when I say promotions are related to consumer promotions and as well as trade. The calculation of forecast accuracy is largely related to a hit and miss. Now that does not account to the amount ordered. Basically, if all SKUs with zero amount ordered were considered as a hit. So it's not basis a statistical formula, but it's basically that if the particular SKU is actually been sold as per the forecast, and if yes, then it's a hit, and if not, then it's a miss. So that's how the challenges are which we faced, and we are in the process of overcoming these challenges. But GitaCloud came up with did a pilot study for us, and that's where Dr. Ramesh and team did a pilot study and helped us to give us a solution for the same. So I'll hand over the podium to Dr. Ramesh.
Yeah, thank you, Anand, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar. I had great pleasure in helping GitaCloud for the past 3 years. Last summer, we were asked to do a pilot for Dabur International, and I'm going to present in the next few slides what we did at GitaCloud, working as a team with Ashutosh and two other consultants. We had the flowchart that you see here shows an overview of the different steps that we did in the process of coming up with a forecast analysis, which consists of two parts. One is coming up with what we call as a baseline forecast accuracy. In other words, the way Dabur has been forecasting their SKUs, and the way I think we used time series models like smoothing models to come up with a better forecast. So let me quickly go over the different blocks here. The very first one is where we looked at the data files and tried to familiarize ourselves with what GitaCloud's, what Dabur's products are, SKUs are, and all that. I should point out that Dabur did an excellent job in providing the data. Many times, I think it's if you don't have proper data, you can't really do proper forecasting. So thank you, Dabur, for that. And we defined the scope for our statistical forecasting. So in other words, I think we selected 2 different countries, and I'm going to present results from one of those countries. So one of the big markets that Dabur had internationally. And the third step was choosing the forecast error metric. So as you all know, there are different types of forecast error metrics to measure accuracy. Most popular ones that people are aware of are the mean absolute deviation and mean squared error, which measures the mean and standard deviation of errors. for the forecast that you're making versus what the actual demand is. But we choose, after some thought, I think, what we call is weighted MAPE. So MAP is like the mean absolute percentage error. So what you do is you take the difference of the actual demand and the forecast for a given SKU, for instance, and then you divide that by the maximum of the forecast or the actual demand for the SKU. So in other words, I think the reason I think MAP is more appropriate for many models is, for many forecasting problems is, the value of the actual demand or the forecast sometime can kind of, I think, provide a distorted picture. So if you take only MAD, I think you take the difference between actual and forecast. But in an MAP, you are taking the percentage variation that instead of, I think, just the difference. So when the numbers of the actual demand are very large or very low for different SKUs, MAP would create a better picture of by how much you have, how much is the variation that is created irrespective of the value of the actual demand. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. So moving on, we established, I think, forecast accuracy baseline. So what this means is, as Anand has pointed out in the previous slide, their forecasting is based on the hit and miss criteria. But we felt that, I think, that would create, that's not creating the right forecast accuracy picture. So we came up with a forecast accuracy for the current way Dabur is forecasting. So that's what the baseline forecast accuracy is. Then we set up all the Dabur data in the framework of SAP IBP planning area. Following which, we uploaded the historical data for the 29 months for each of the SKUs in the specific country, in the countries for which I think we had the data. So this 29 months of data started from January 2015 to May 2017. So I think one of the things that we did was we had to clean up the data a little bit. There are quite a few outliers in places where some SKUs had data missing totally for many number of months in that 29-month time frame. So we did a little bit of a cleaning, and then now we are all ready to start using our forecasting models. So I think we used a series of a number of time series models, and specifically simple exponential smoothing, Holt's, and Winter's model. So the simple exponential smoothing model works good only for data that has a level pattern or the data is moving around an average historical data. The Holt's exponential smoothing works good if the data has, the historical data has not only an averaging pattern, but also it has a trend. And finally, the Winters not only captures the level trend, but it also captures the seasonality patterns in the past historical data. So we use it for three different lags: lag 0, lag 1, lag 2. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. And then we looked at the forecast error generated by all these techniques for the past historical data and picked the best model. So how did we decide the best model to forecast Dabur's data for May to show for May 2017 to present the case to Dabur that our techniques, I think, have done reasonably good. So I think in forecasting there are two things that we do. When you're given historical data, like the way we are given January 2015 to May 2017, always I think to kind of determine how your forecasting technique is doing, you divide the entire timeline into two parts. The first part is called the initialization part, and the second part is called the testing part. So the initialization part is where I think you're taking a part of the data given to you and you're forecasting for the second part and seeing how your forecasting method is doing. So to give an example, for this data of 29 months, we started from January 2015 and went all the way to November of 2016. So we're talking about a total of, I think, December of 2016, I think. So I think we're talking a total of about 24 months. And then we used that 2 years of data, and then we forecasted the demand for the months of January, February, March, April, May, for each of the three methods I described: exponential smoothing, simple exponential smoothing, Holt's method, Holt's exponential smoothing, and Whittle's exponential smoothing. So note that we have the actual demand available for January, February, March, April, May of 2017. So we could compare how each of these methods did for each of those 5 months. So in other words, I think now we could measure the accuracy of each of these methods using the forecast error for January through May, and then we were able to select the best technique. So that's how I think we picked the best model, and the best model happened to be Winter's exponential smoothing. And if I remember correctly, I think Winter's additive model. So following which, we used Winter's model to kind of compare our forecast method with what Dabur was doing, which is what we say as I think, comparing baseline, which is the way Dabur is forecasting versus, the way our forecasting method came up with the forecast. And then we present results following that. Moving on, let me quickly describe what the hit-miss methodology of Dabur was. So here I think we have 5 market types in this metric. And let us take, for example, market type 1A. So this metrics was given to us by Dabur. So the way you read this is, for market type 1A, you have, depending on the ABC classification, so A items, B items, and C items, the further classified as A plus A, B plus B, I think, within AB. So these are based on the dollar volume. So like a typical ABC classification. So for market type 1A, 15%, what it means is if the forecast purchase orders are within 15% of an A segment product, then this forecast is considered a hit, else a miss. So I think if you came up with a forecast, and if Dabur's team came up with a forecast, and if it is within plus or minus 15% of the actual orders that came in, then they say this is a hit. So on the same token, if you look at the C item 75%, what it means is if you Dabur came with a forecast, and if it is within 75%, plus or minus 75% of the actual orders that came in, they consider it as a hit. or okay. So we count the number of products which qualified as a hit and divide by the total number of products in A segment to report forecast accuracy for A segment. So we're looking at A segment, let us say we're looking at A segment products, which is this. So for all the products for which Dabur is forecasting, we calculate the hit for each of those SKUs using this criteria, and then the total number of hits divided by total number of hits less the total number of misses, right? So it gives you the forecast accuracy for A segment. So note that the tolerance band changes by product segment and by market type. So as you can see, 1A is pretty good, but if you look at, if you go down to something like 2B, the tolerance band is much wider. So from what I remember, I think the country for which we did the analysis was market type, I think 1A or 1B. 1B. So quickly presenting the forecast accuracy metric that was used by us for baseline forecast accuracy measurements, as well as the forecast accuracy measurements using our methods, explanation method. So I think as I was stating in the previous slides, MAP is the ratio of the difference in demand and forecast divided by the maximum of the demand and forecast. Maximum of the demand and forecast. And weighted MAP, we went a step further, and we said that the weighted MAP for market is the SKU specific MAP multiplied by the demand for the SKU divided by the demand for all the SKUs. So to give you an example here, let us say the demand for a specific SKU code as defined here for January 2017 is 200, and the January 2017 forecast is 110. So the absolute error is the difference of those two. So if you get a negative number, I think you take, in this case, we got a positive number, but if you get a negative number, you take the absolute value. So 90 is the difference between the demand and what you forecasted. So the MAP for this specific SKU for January 2017 is that 90 divided by maximum of these two. So that's why it is 45%. And the SKU weight. So this is SKU. This is the standard MAP that is used in forecasting, many forecasting models that is taught in academia. But we used what we call as in weighted MAP, which is even better. So what we did was we took the demand for the SKU and divided by the total demand for the markets. So the percentage weight of this SKU compared to all the SKUs in the market. So the weighted MAP for the market for which we did analysis, for instance, here is the sum of the specific the SKU for this for the specific SKU multiplied by the weight, and then we continue that. In other words, for the next SKU, we get the MAP like that, and then we calculate the weight, and then we continue that. So that's how we get the weighted MAP. So note that this is the forecast error. So our accuracy is, I think, 100 minus that. So in this case, this forecasting method has come up with an accuracy of 64%. So I think we present the results for country 1. So we selected, we used a total of 447 SKUs for this country. And based on the hit and miss approach, using Dabur's approach, I think the forecast accuracy, we found based on the way I think they were using hit and miss that I described is 66%. So this is for I think the baseline numbers that I'm presenting. So using MAP based forecast accuracy for May 2017. Using a hit and miss it is 66%, but when we calculated it using the way it has to be calculated correctly, as we saw in the last slide, it was in fact only 35%. And the baseline lag one, so lag one means I think we are looking at all the data till April, and then we are looking in April forecasting for May. So we have all the information of actual demand till April 2017 and use that to forecast for forecasted demand in May 2017. So again here, the hit and miss based approach that Dabur gave us was 56%, but in fact I think their forecast accuracy, in other words, the way Dabur was forecasting, the numbers were much lower, like 35%. So in other words, I think using the current way of forecasting, Dabur's forecast accuracies were as low as 35%. So this table presents, the next thing, part of this table, I think, presents the forecast accuracy for different lags, lag 0, lag 1, and 2, using our methods. So specifically, I think, using the Winters exponential smoothing method for lag 0, in other words, we looked at the data till April, and then we came up with the forecast for May using the Winters exponential smoothing, and our accuracy numbers were as good as, I think, 64%. So in other words, 64% versus 35% is what we are looking at. So in terms of percentage improvements, 64 minus 35, I think if you take the difference and divide by, so you are talking about a baseline improvement of 83% here. Lag 1, in other words, you're looking at the actual demand till March 2017, and then we are coming up with a forecast for May. So May is, I think, just 2 months away, so I think, so using Winters method, the accuracy, forecast accuracy numbers using WMAP were 63%. So again, we are talking about 63% compared to 35%. So improvement of 66% in the way Dabur was forecasting. So we also did for lag 2, which is, I think, we looked the data till February 2017 and then forecasted for the month of May 2017, which is 2 months ahead. And our method came up with a forecast accuracy of 64%. So I think, why did we do for May? The reason we did for May in all these cases is because we were doing this pilot in June of 2017. So for that reason, I think, we had the data till May. So to kind of present a quick snapshot of the overall forecast accuracy across the entire timeline, starting from January 2015 to May 2017. In other words, if we were to do what we did here for May, for each of the months, starting from, let us say, May, I think from what I remember, I think, for all the 24 months, I think, let us say, I think forecasting for February 2015, like that, I think. So forecasting for March 2015 all the way till December 2016. If you look at our forecast accuracy, it was as much as I think 74%. For 29 months, it was like 68%. In other words, this is like the average forecast accuracy. If you take the average of all the forecast accuracy for 24 months. Similarly, the average of the forecast accuracy for all the 29 months. So to kind of summarize, I think based on the data that we had for the 447 SKUs for country 1, we were able to come up with forecast accuracy numbers that were significantly better than the way Dabur was currently forecasting. So the next slide kind of summarizes the same forecast accuracy breakup by SKU classification. So what we presented in the previous slide was an aggregated picture of forecast accuracy across all 447 SKUs. But I think if we have to break it up by SKU classification, like A plus A, B plus B, C, and we didn't have any classification for some of them. So 30 of them, 30 out of 447 were A plus, 57 out of 447 were A, so on and so forth. 164 out of 447 were C type of products. So I think the way you would read this is among the baseline, which is I think the way Dabur was forecasting and using, and if you use the WMAP error metric, the forecast accuracy was as low as 24%. So in each of these rows, we highlighted the one that gave the lowest value of the forecast accuracy. So in this case, A plus, I think, it was baseline lag 0. For A, it was statistical lag 1 method that we used. And for B plus, it is baseline lag 0 from Dabur, like that. So as you could see, our methods, A plus, we clearly performed each of the methods for different lags. Clearly I think most of them outperformed, I think, the way Dabur was doing. And then for A, I think we were comparable. And for B plus, I think, we, for each of these methods, as you could see, I think, to summarize, I think we were providing good forecast accuracy, overall good forecast accuracy compared to the baseline. So specifically, if you could look at C, we're significantly better, and even we were able to come up with forecast accuracies for those SKUs for which we didn't have information. So one of the things that I should point out here is that we only tried simple time series models like exponential smoothing methods. But I think, as you all know, in SAP IBP, we have a lot more multiple regression models. We have ARIMA models, which we would present a little bit later into the webinar. We could do the improvements here based on my academic experience. If you use a variety of these more advanced techniques like multiple regression ARIMA models, the results would be even more better. So I'd like to thank you all for joining the webinar again, and I'd like to hand over the podium to Todd. He'll talk about the SAP IBP demand forecasting methods in SAP.
Great. Thank you very much. So I'll go through a quick overview of SAP Integrated Business Planning for Demand and features and functions. Let me see if I can hide this control panel. All right. just to make sure that doesn't interfere. If you look at the sort of the basic idea of integrated business planning for demand, effectively we want to develop more accurate midterm statistical forecasts, which the example that you just heard about would kind of fall into that. We also want to react faster to short-term demand changes, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and then you'll see some of that in the demonstration. And also we want to collaborate. So these are fairly simple things, which are all meant to drive more accurate deployment of product based on that short-term and/or long-term demand. So they're fairly simple goals that we have in IBP for demand. If you look at the here we go. If you look at the basic building blocks of functionality that we will look at in IBP for demand, fundamentally, if we start with, we want to be able to create and collaborate on a consensus demand plan. We want to have new product introduction functionality, things like phase in and phase out curves, like modeling to use for successor products. We want to be able to plan on priorities and segmentation results, and you saw a little bit of that in the in the example we just went through. You'll see a little bit more of that in the demonstration, of how we come up with some of those segmentations. We want to deal with forecast accuracy, again, a key component of the of what you just heard with the the proof of concept. We want to create the actual statistical forecast with statistical algorithms. So we'll talk about kind of what algorithms we have. And then the last piece is the idea of this running daily forecasts with demand sensing. And we'll talk a little bit about demand sensing for those of you who may not be familiar with it. And then that is part of the demonstration as well. The one thing I always like to talk about is that people oftentimes ask us at SAP about the relationship between forecasting for sales and operations planning and then regular demand planning and demand sensing, and I put together this sort of general slide that IBP covers kind of all of these things. We might segment it a little bit by the way we talk about different areas of functionality within IBP, but in general, if you look at the very long-term or S&OP type forecasting that you're looking at and trying to increase forecast accuracy, you might be looking at things like macroeconomic indicators, global or regional trends. Oftentimes you're getting marketing input as part of the collaborative process. As we move into the medium term, so more of what we would term traditional demand planning, we're running statistical forecasts. We're getting maybe salespeople's input on the next quarter or two. Key customer activities that we might be doing, especially if we talk consumer products. We've got trade promotions, those types of things, and midterm trends. And then as we move into the very short term or demand sensing arena, we're talking about trying to use order patterns and very short term trends to make adjustments to our forecasts. And so we look at it from a general SAP integrated business planning perspective that we can handle all of these things. You also tend to move much more from on the left side of S&OP is more judgmental forecasting and basically different people's input to all the way down in the right side, which is very mathematical and hands-off forecasting as well. If we look at sort of the general business processes covered, if we look at from more of a consensus demand plan, and this might be demand planning or S&OP, sort of a weekly, monthly process, really we're looking at historical sales data, other historic data. We're going to apply our statistical algorithms, and then we're going to get inputs from different departments, right? So that might be sales, marketing, local demand planners that have knowledge that the math doesn't know about. So things that are going on that maybe aren't historically based, or they're changes to the competitive landscape, those types of things to drive a consensus demand plan. From an SAP perspective, we then take that consensus demand plan and we're going to, on a daily basis for demand sensing, we're going to use the demand sensing algorithms and come up with a daily sense demand plan. And the inputs for this may be shipments, sales orders, trade promotions, probably in the future, and also point of sale data, right? So we can use point of sale data today. I didn't realize I hadn't updated this slide. But that's one of the things that we now can take into the demand sensing algorithms. And we can also do some things with trade promotions, but we're going to be doing more with that in the future. If we talk a little bit about the difference between demand planning and demand sensing, really demand planning is more time series methods that we talked about, although we're starting to branch out from that a little bit. You'll see in the statistical models. We're also then it's based on history, seasonal and trend patterns, those types of things. Demand sensing, we're talking about adjusting that longer-term demand plan and then using very, very recent past data or present data, and we're using pattern recognition algorithms, so a slightly different class of algorithms. And you can see this is just an example below here that says, we may have a longer-term forecast, which is the yellow line, but in the near term, things may deviate from that, right? And so we want to look at that difference between that short-term forecast and the consensus mid or long-term forecast, right? So the demand sensing may pick up interesting trends in the very short term, differences to the ordering patterns of some of your customers, and so then those things may need to be baked into the longer-term forecast. So what we generally do with demand sensing, and this is about as technical as we tend to get, is we're basically taking the inputs. We're looking at things like open orders that you have. We're going to look at bias. We're going to look at we call it sort of forecast consumption. That is, if I have orders out for the next week or 2 weeks, I want to look at, do those fit the pattern, and are those extraordinary orders? And I do a set of weekly adjustments to my forecast. I then use historical forecast patterns and shipment patterns to do a daily disaggregation. We also do that. We also weight that over multiple lags, right? So we look at, does a change in the order pattern take a week or 2 weeks to show up in the actual demand? And so we do all of that and come up with a forecast, right? And so that's a very simple way of looking at it. If we look at what can this impact, this will differ based on different companies, right? So for most companies, a very near short-term forecast, so the next six weeks or so in daily buckets, probably deployment or transportation decisions that you're making. So I'm sending from a distribution center to a regional distribution center. It might get into things like production packaging sequences and even possibly material purchasing, depending on the company. Clearly, with companies that have very long lead times for manufacturing and or procurement, it's probably more on the deployment transportation decisions as opposed to material purchasing. But there is a range of things that it could take into account. We also, overarching of this, we talk about inventory optimization. So if you look at trying to use the variability of your demand to drive inventory, which we do in IBP, the accuracy and the variability of that forecast is going to be slightly different in that near term, and so that may change the way that you're looking at your inventory policies. If we look at just a quick example of the demand sensing, how this works, the idea is that if I'm going from national to a sort of regional DC, if I look at a traditional method of smearing it across the days, so a weekly forecast of days, I might be deploying, I might be sending out, I might have a total weekly forecast of 40 units, and I'm going to send it equally to both of these DCs. The reality may be a little bit different, that the pattern within the week may be that the East DC is more heavily weighted at the beginning of the week with its orders. The West DC is weighted more to the back end of the week. And so if I pick up these trends in demand sensing and I update the short-term forecast, what I may get is I may get demand that drives a different replenishment schedule. So as you see here, the 40 units may be the same. We may or may not adjust that. But even if it does stay the same, I'm going to basically have demand that is different at the two DCs, and I'm going to be ending up deploying out to that forecast in a different manner, right? So I'll do more to the East DC early in the week, less to the West DC early in the week, and vice versa as we go through the week, right? And so this has impacts on your transportation decisions. Again, how much do I need to send to the East DC? Might need different transportation methods. It also is going to impact my inventory when I look at, if I were to send this by the old pattern of just the same across the week, there's a situation that could end up in a shortage on the East DC and unable to fill an order while I'm sitting on inventory in the West DC, right? And so I would look at having additional inventory at the West DC. So this is the thing that we're trying to drive with this short-term demand sensing, and just an example. If we look at the overall statistical forecasting methods in IBP, we talked about a few in the previous example. But the time series algorithms, we have a listing here. I want to point out 3 things down at the bottom of the list. One is that in the 18.0 release, we include ARIMA models. So that's auto ARIMA and SARIMA, which is the seasonal ARIMA. We included Brown's exponential smoothing, which is more of a trend methodology. And then we have planned, hopefully for 2018, to include gradient boosting. This is where I mentioned that we're getting away from all of these are really time series methods. Gradient boosting is actually a machine learning algorithm that's a decision tree methodology that can take in multiple, multiple independent demands and other features that you calculate to calculate a forecast. So we're starting to depart a little bit from traditional time series algorithms. So we're going to have to redo this slide, I think, in in the next few months. We also have multiple linear regression as well for additional, multiple independent variable forecasting if it applies, right? And I think that we're going to talk a little bit more about ARIMA and also about the demand sensing algorithms as well that we have coming. There was also some discussion about forecast error calculation. So we have a whole range of forecast error calculations. Dr. Ramesh talked about the ones that he likes. And so we can do all of these. We can calculate these based on any lag. Any key figures can be used as inputs. So we can do things like statistical forecast versus actuals, your consensus demand plan versus actuals, your sales plan versus actuals, to look at things like, are you adding value as you're doing adjustments to it? So we can do any amount of these, and we can create different profiles to go ahead and calculate those forecast errors for you. So I think that that's a very important piece of functionality. The last piece I wanted to just mention is that I talked about using the point of sale data for demand sensing as being something new. We actually do have integration of point of sale data from the SAP Demand Signal Management System, which is a system to cleanse and harmonize things like point of sale data. And so we have this set up to do the mappings, bring it into IBP, and then it can be utilized in your planning area in IBP so that you can use that as part of the forecasting. So that was kind of the whirlwind introduction of some of these. We typically talk about other features and everything, but you're going to see a lot of those in the demo, so we thought it would be better to take a look at those sort of as you go through the demo.
Hello everyone, this is Ashish. I will now take you through IBP for Demand Showcase. So before moving on to the application side, let me familiarize you with the data set that we are using for this showcase. We are using a consumer product industry data set, and we have taken 2 years worth of sales history across 200 plus products which are being sold at multiple locations, having presence at different geographies. By using segmentation app in IBP, we can segment our products by predictability and the volume. I'll show you how the demand planner can manage a large SKU location set of combination by running ABC XYZ segmentation to account for the revenue contribution as well as the forecastability. So this is how an ABC XYZ segmentation looks like. So this is how you divide this segment into. So if you see this, you have a some product which are very high volume and they have a constant or relatively stable demand. So this is how you can segment your products or your planning object, and then according to this segment you can apply different planning approaches based upon the segment that you have created. So in IBP, we can add attributes to our product to identify what segment they belong to, and we can use this segmentation attribute for filtering, which will make it easier for a demand planner to adopt different planning strategies for the different segments. Right, so when we are creating segmentation profile, we can decide whether we want to segment or just on the volume, that is your ABC segmentation, or onto the predictability, that is your XYZ segmentation, or you can use both within the same profile. So this segmentation helps by segmenting across your volume and volatility dimensions. So basically, if you see in this example, we want our statistical engine to be focused on forecasting XY segments. So basically, which are having low volatility or medium volatility, just because we can sense a good degree of forecastability onto them. And then we may want our sales and marketing team to provide their refinement to the base stat forecast that we have generated for the A class of segments. That is your high volume and stable demand segment. Now your demand planner can focus on the B kind of segment, whereas we can leave the part of CZ combination for a reorder point type planning mechanism. So we have a choice of segmentation measures here. For example, we can choose a revenue key figure to assign planning object to various segments based on their contribution to the overall revenue. You can also use your delivered quantity key figure to segment based upon the contribution to the overall delivered quantity. You can provide filter criteria. For example, you want to generate ABC segment for all the product at a specific location only. You can also use an aggregated level time granularity, like you want to do your ABC segmentation on the basis of quarters, and you can also log the segmentation. So this will help you not to override the result that you have generated from the previous run. So any subsequent run will not impact your previous run by the logging mechanism. So on the similar concept, we have created one customer example wherein we have defined our segment as sprinters, joggers, walkers, and crawlers. So which is basically sprinters is our high volume segments, joggers little lower than that, walkers is an average demand, whereas crawlers are the low volume product. And we have defined XYZ segmentation as stable, trending, and the erratic. And based upon this, we have created segments in our profile and used in our showcase. So I'll just show you in this system how we can create ABC segmentation. So you have a segmentation app wherein you can select which segment you want to create and where you want to save and what is the target key figure that you can select. You can select the periodicity for your segmentation, and the most important thing is the segmentation method. So you have some segmentation methods available by segmentation method, percentage or values, or by the number of items. You can do that. So in our example, as I mentioned, we have used the 4 different segments which is having a threshold as 60%, 25, 10, and 5. So likewise for XYZ segmentation, we have coefficient of variation as 0.5 and 1 for our stable and seasonal. So the idea here is, so we have you can create a custom attribute wherein you can save save as a value segment and also volatility segment. So in this example, our sprinters correspond to the 60% of the delivered quantities. Joggers correspond to the 25% of the delivered quantity. Likewise, for volatility segment, stable correspond to the coefficient of variation which are less than 0.5. So once you define this, you have an application job wherein you can run this job and see the result in your Excel. So after running this job, when you look at your planning view in the Excel sheet, so once your job is run, you can see that your ABC XYZ segmentation is assigned to your product location combination based upon the key figure that you have selected and the overall contribution that they have for the target key figure. So as you can see, for a product location combination, they belong to sprinters and stable, and for some product they belong to joggers and stable, and you will have a combination according to the data and the segment that you have defined. So now for all your planning purpose, you can use this segmentation to, in order to filter it out. You can filter all your products only based upon the joggers and the stable, or you can do it on the sprinters. You can do filter, and as well as in your view, as well as when you're running any job, maybe your stat forecast or any other job, you can use this filter as well there also. So Now that you have understood how IBP can flexibly segment the product location level planning objects so that you can do differentiated planning, now let's turn our attention to the first planning process in demand forecasting or an SNOP process, which is stat forecasting. We have a managed forecast model app in IBP from wherein you can create your forecast model. So there are some prerequisites or the parameter that needs to be entered in order to complete your forecast model. So first one being your general parameter, wherein you define your name and you give all the horizon for your forecasting for your history period as well as the forecasting period, and you define the offset. Now the next step is your forecasting step. So now let's understand IBP stat forecasting capability. So IBP has many forecasting models available. So I'll cover a subset of them today, and with the focus of recent additions like your ARIMA, seasonal ARIMA, Brown's exponential, and I'll also showcase how IBP can automate exponential smoothing forecast in terms of picking the best model across multiple options as well as optimizing the coefficient for your alpha, beta, and gamma parameters. I'll ask Dr. Ramesh to give you a brief introduction and an example of ARIMA and seasonal ARIMA forecasting algorithm.
The ARIMA models are the reason I think they have becoming popular. They have been popular is because most of the time series models, regression models, they could be special cases of ARIMA models. So we'll start with some definitions here. ARIMA stands for autoregressive integrated moving average models. So there are like three components there: AR, MA, and I. So I'll walk over I think each one of them in the coming slides here. So first I think let us define what a stationary time series is and what a non-stationary time series is. So stationary time series is one where for different time intervals or time periods, the variability is more or less the same. The mean variability properties don't change. So an example is the level data. When the data is moving around an average, that is an example of stationary time series. And non-stationary is one where the properties of mean variability are changing from time period to time period. And a simple example is the trend, linear trend, for example, is an example of non-stationary time series. So we have, I think, I'm going to start off by presenting the most simplest one, which is the ARIMA models for stationary, non-seasonal. At this point, still there is no seasonality. So without seasonality, you have stationary time series. So I think, so let us define what an AR model is, what an MA model is in light of that. So the AR models, as you would see through these equations here, you forecast the demand for a certain time period, in this case it is YT, as a function of the independent variables, which are nothing but the same variable lagged by different time periods. Like, YT minus 1 is the value of Y lagged by one time period. In other words, I think, that is something that you already realized. So I think all the data is realized. So I think in this time period, so let us say you're forecasting for the next time period. So YT is like the forecast for the next time period, and YT minus 1 is the realized order for this time period. And then I think YT minus 2 is the realized order for time period T minus 2, so on and so forth. So in a way, AR model is nothing but I think you're doing a regression of on the lags of the data from different time periods. So that is a way to look at it. I think where the independent variables are the values in different the values of y in lag by different time periods. So the next, so to generalize, I think for most part, it is not the notation. The standard notation is ARP. ARP means I think you are considering up to P lags. Now I think P is a variable, so we need to decide what should be the value of P. And further, I think there is a theory I think that kind of tells us how many lags you want to go backwards. Should you stop at P minus 2 or should you stop at P minus 3 or you want to go up to T minus 10? So that depends on the problem. And I would say for most part, you won't go more than 3 or 4 lags. So the next thing is the moving averages model, which is the MA model in the ARIMA, where we are trying to estimate the error term. So note that in a standard regression, you have 2 components. The first component is the estimated value, how well you can estimate, right, using a regression line. And the second part is the error term, right? So essentially, I think the difference between what you estimated and what is realized is your error. So basically, what you are doing here is you are looking at the error terms from the past forecast, and then you're trying to estimate, I think, your the value of YT based on those error terms and the mean value of the forecast over those 2 time periods. So I think what we in simple terms, I think it is denoted as MAQ. So again, I think Q is how many lakhs of error terms you want to consider. So we probably don't have to go in details into all of that. At this point, I think all we have to know is the thing what an AR is, what an MA is, and where they come from. So ARIMA, which is auto-regressive moving averages model, is where you combine these two. In a way, I think you're estimating your value of YT based on the AR model, which is a guesstimate of Y, and then you are estimating the values of the error terms accurately using the MA model, right? So I think that's why you have the AR and MA combined. So let us move on to the ARIMA. Where does ARIMA come in? So when the time series is, when the data has a pattern of a stationary pattern, moves around an average, doesn't have a lot of variability between time periods, a simple ARIMA is sufficient. So ARIMA is required when you have a non-stationary time series. A non-stationary time series, a simple example is a trend. When you have a linear trend, the variation is increasing from time period to time period. So that is where I think you have that I coming between AR and MA, right? So and what is that? And that is where you do differencing, right? So as an example, I think here we the integrated part of an ARIMA model, what really does is I think it takes a non-stationary time series, differences it, and then it brings you to the form of a stationary time series. In this example, we illustrate how a non-stationary series data can be converted to a stationary series data. So an excellent example of a non-stationary series data is data that has trend, either linear trend or non-linear trend. And an example of level data is, or stationary data is data that moves around an average. So let us look at this example and see how differencing removes the trend part and thus makes a non-stationary series data into a stationary series data. So I have an example here for a 1 year or 12 months And these are original data that you see here in column C. So in order to do different things, we need to first lag the data by one time period, which is what I have done in column D. In other words, we've taken all this data and we have lagged it by one time period, which means that 123 in January goes as 123 in the month of February. And similarly, 128, the original data in February, lagged by one time period, is the one that shows up in March for a lag of T-1. So the difference thing essentially is the difference between the value of YT and YT minus 1. So the original data lagged by one time period. So in this case, 128 minus 123, which is 5, as you see here. Similarly for March, I think it is 134 minus 128, so on and so forth. As you can see, this data clearly has a trend because the values are increasing from 123 to 128, 128 to 134, 134 to 139, so on and so forth. So it is having a trend or non-stationary. Whereas the differenced part has values of 5, 6, 5, 5, 5, 6, like that. So clearly, I think, this data is level data are moving around an average. Or in other words, I think it is stationary. So in the last example, we have seen how we can convert a non-stationary series data to a stationary series data by differentiating it once. But many a times, given the complexity of non-stationary series data, we may have to difference more than once. So the example here shows us how the first order differencing doesn't yield a stationary series data. So as you can see, I think the similar example, but with the data changed a little bit. So this is the data that we are using. We have steeper increases, the first order differencing, I have done it exactly the same way as in the other example. And we see that based on the values here, it has a trend. In other words, I think the first order differencing of this data is not giving us a stationary time series. Still, it is not stationary because I think the values are increasing with time, or they have a trend like a pattern. So let us say, how we can convert this to a stationary series using the second order differencing. So in the second order differencing, what we do is we take the lag of the first order differencing. In other words, in column E, whatever we have, we kind of lag it by one time period. So we call it delta T minus 1 here. So in other words, all I did was I took this data and then I think I lagged it by one time period. So this 8 goes here, 12 goes here, 14 goes here, so on and so forth. So the second order differencing is now the difference of delta T and delta T minus 1. In other words, I think it is a difference of these two numbers now, 12 minus 8, which yields us a value of 4, 14 minus 12, which gives us a value of 2, 17 minus 14, a value of 3, so on and so forth. So as you can see, this data more or less has a level pattern, or it is moving around an average. So clearly, I think, compared to the kind of trend we have here, we see with the second order differencing, that trend has been removed and we have moved to a stationary time series. So basically, I think what should the differencing level be depends on how randomness, how much randomness is there in the non-stationary time series data that you're evaluating, right? So with that, I think we can now talk about a general ARIMA model, PDQ. So P is like, the order of AR component. D is the number of differences you're doing. Q is the number of order of MEA component. In other words, till how many error terms you want to go, right? So for most part, I think, the good news is, I think, the values of PDQ don't go very far. You don't get PDQs equal to 10, 15 like that. More like, up to 4 or 5, I think, max. So that's why we talked about ARIMA models for stationary and non-stationary series for non-seasonal, when you don't have seasonality. So what do you do when you have seasonality, right? So if you have a non-stationary time series that has seasonality, which is like the most complicated thing to forecast, how do you do that? So that is where I think we have the ARIMA models for seasonal time series. So I think we define seasonality here as, for example, if you're looking at quarterly data, it is 4. For monthly data, it is 12. So if the regular difference is between, if 2 times it is YT and YT minus 1, as we have seen before, the first seasonal difference is between T and T minus S. For example, if you're looking at retail data for 2 years, then the most important time period is December. So the seasonality has value is equal to 12. So you look at the actual demand, for example, for December 2017 and the actual data for December 2016. So you take the difference of those two. So in order to get your first seasonal difference. So kind of, I think, the generalized version of the ARIMA, that is not stationary seasonal time series model, looks like this. Apart from the regular PDQ, you have another version of capital P, capital D, capital Q, which are associated with the seasonal time series part. Okay, and again, I think, as we see here, the capital P stands for the order of seasonal AR component, capital D stands for the amount of seasonal differencing, and capital Q stands for order of seasonal moving average component. So I think to show a simple example of a ARIMA seasonal model, we have it here. So I think these are like 2 simple examples, I think, that I just want to put up here. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you got a good tutorial, basic tutorial on what ARIMA models are.
Thanks, Dr. Ramesh, for the brief explanation. So I will now showcase how we can use multiple. We can utilize multiple forecast, and we can choose the best out of the multiple forecast. So in my forecasting steps, so I have identified my the algorithm that I want to use for my forecast. So I have input for my forecasting. I have my target key figure to store the forecast result. Also, I have given the ex post forecast quantity to be stored, and the algorithm that I've selected in my best pick model is auto ARIMA, considering the ARIMA algorithm, seasonal ARIMA, and then automated exponential smoothing, simple moving average, and the Brown's linear algorithm. The there are some parameters that you need to input for each of these algorithms. So considering the automated exponential smoothing, so this algorithm automatically select the most suitable exponential smoothing algorithm and identifies the optimum coefficient for it before it calculates the forecast. So this algorithm will check for any trend or seasonality that you have in your historical data. Based upon the result, it will choose whether the single, double, or triple exponential algorithm would be used for your forecast calculation. It will calculate the X forecast quantity. It will compare the calculated X forecast with your error measure, and then it calculates the forecast using the selected algorithm and the coefficients. So here we are using the scope as select smoothing algorithm with the best result. It will consider the MAP as a measure for optimization. The system will automatically calculate the number of periods in a season, and if you enable trend dampening, then gradually the trend is eliminated from the forecast based upon the 5 parameter that is calculated by the system. And I have created an interim key figure in order to store the result for my automated exponential smoothing. So moving on to the next algorithm, simple moving average. So for this algorithm also, I have created an interim key figure to store the value. So the reason for creating an interim key figure and storing the values of a respective algorithm in that key figure is you can then compare the values of the forecast. So although the system will pick the best forecast from this model, and it will update the statistical forecast, that is your target value for your forecast, but keeping this interim key figure, you can anytime compare the performance of your different algorithm. The next model I selected is Brown's linear. So this is more or less similar to your double exponential smoothing, wherein it is better than double exponential in terms of reducing the effect of trends on the forecast. So basically the resulting forecast will respond to changes in the trend more rapidly than the forecast generated by the double exponential. So once you define all the algorithm that you want to select, that you want to consider for your model, then you can utilize multiple forecasts, and you can select the best forecast out of the ones that you have defined. And you need to to assign the measure that will be used to compare the forecast. And also you have something called test phase period. So if you specify any number in the test phase period, so basically you are splitting your horizon, your historical horizon, into two parts. One would be your test phase part, and another would be your training phase part. The training phase is will be used by the system to train the various algorithm that you have maintained in your model on the post forecast, while the test phase is reserved to assess the prediction accuracy of each algorithm, that is the forecast accuracy in the historical horizon. So basically when you separate your horizon, so your real prediction, the forecast, is compared with the historical sales data. So therefore system can more reliably choose the algorithm that calculates the best forecast. Now let's look into the Excel view by running a stat forecast algorithm. So I'm running my best fit forecast model, which I just showed you in this system, to see how the forecast results are populated for the different product location combination. So now the job is run, and you can see the result. So I have populated all the interim key figures for my algorithm that I have selected, like for stat forecast ARIMA, for seasonal ARIMA, for automated exponential simple moving average, and Brown's linear. And depending upon the historical data that we have for that particular product location combination, the most effective forecast model will be selected. So in this particular example, if you see for my product GC71250 at location L25, the Brown's linear exponential smoothing is selected based upon the MAP value. Likewise, depending upon the data, you have different models selected. We can see on the log. We can see log to check what was the MAP for each of these model, and here we can see that the lowest MAP is selected as the best fit algorithm for that particular product location combination. So here you can see all the algorithms are running, and all the algorithms are running, and then when this best forecast phase is started in the test phase, you can see that the MAP for all the algorithms. For this particular example, you can see for ARIMA 1 and seasonal ARIMA, you can see the MAP percentage, and the lowest MAP was for your simple moving average, so it got selected. So likewise for your different product and location combination, depending upon the history data, the trend and the seasonality, and the other factors that are being considered by the algorithm will get selected, and the error measure will get calculated, and the lowest error the algorithm with the lowest error will get selected as the best fit algorithm. So far we have covered the data or the algorithm side of the demand planning process. Now let's turn our attention to how other stakeholders group like the sales representatives, sales management, and the marketing, how these people can leverage IBP. Sales teams are simply not going to forecast thousands of your SKU location combination. Their job is to sell and not to forecast. So the insight that they have on the key account, the key customer and the key product is critical. So with the ABC XYZ segmentation, it helps to identify the critical product and the customer that a sales representative should provide input on. So in our example, we are asking a sales representative to forecast A parts. So basically the sprinters part that we have defined in this segment. And for all rest of the segment, we are defaulting stat forecast quantity to our sales forecast. And for the critical product customer combination, we are asking salesperson to give their input. So as a sales representative, sales representative can add based upon his experience on the customer and the product. He can add input on top of the stat forecast quantity that is being derived by the system. He can also see the product and customer level forecast. Since they have the unit price, they can see how the sales forecast revenue is there for a particular period, whether it is monthly or weekly, and then he has a sales target or the sales quota for that particular period, and he can compare with the sales quota, and then he can take the corrective action. Also a sales representative can compare the sales forecast accuracy percentage because he has insight to the previous year's sales forecast as well. So he can compare the accuracy percentage by comparing the current forecast with the previous cycle forecast as well. And also for any of the given period at an aggregated level, maybe at an aggregated level in a quarterly view or in a monthly view, he can compare the sales revenue with the sales quota that has been assigned. So as a sales representative, one has an option to filter it out by his name to check his quota for a particular period of time, and he can do it by putting a filter on it by his name as a sales representative, and he can have a look for his number, uh, comparing the sales forecast revenue with the sales quota, and he can also create an alert based upon the quota and the revenue, and that particular alert, you can see that in a custom monitor custom alert app. So I've created an alert wherein whenever my sales forecast revenue is less than my sales quota, I should get an alert. So for any period, I have defined the periodicity as an quarterly. I want to see at an aggregated level how, as a sales representative, I'm performing considering my sales quota, and then I can see the alert, and then I can take some corrective action for that particular period. Likewise, once the adjustment from the sales representative level is done, we can have the sales management view as well. So the sales management can pull up the data across various different sales representative, and they can see at an aggregated level. So they are concerned, they're not concerned with the individual product customer level, but they want to have a view at a very aggregated level, at an aggregated level, suppose at a customer region level or a product group level. So they can see the aggregated forecast revenue at a sales region level, that too broken by a product group. So generally you can have your sales forecast quantity defaulted to your sales manager forecast quantity, but as a sales manager who is looking at an aggregated level, he has an option to increase the sales quantity for that particular region and for a particular duration. So he can override the forecast revenue number, and then this can translate back to the unit and disaggregate to produce a corresponding product customer and location level sales management forecast quantity. So here, as a sales manager, you can override your quantity. Also you can override the revenue, which will then generate the quantity based upon the price that you have maintained at an aggregated level, and then subsequently this value will get disaggregated proportionally to your product location combination. And also you can here also you have prior cycle data, wherein you can compare how you're performing currently as compared to the previous cycle. So basically here, as a sales manager, you can override the aggregated forecast maybe for the next quarter, and you can make up the number by uplifting the forecast for a certain product line. Now they can request the marketing team to plan promotions, or to advance for a new product introduction, or do some pricing action, so that they can do some demand shaping for a particular product. So next is your marketing view. So from the previous step, from your sales management step, now the marketing lead for a particular product group, he has received some information from us sales manager to help him bridge the revenue gap by doing some demand shaping action. So he can do this adjustment by various means. So he can plan some promotions and he can take new product, he can introduce a new product so as to bridge the revenue gap for the coming quarter. And also one way to do demand shipping is to the one way by which IBP can help you in demand shipping is using a demand model based upon your multiple linear regression capabilities. So yeah, so as a marketing team, you can use a MLR model with some independent variables like your price or your brand sentiment, and then you can do some demand shipping action. So for example, in this particular view, one way of doing some demand shaping is promotion uplift. You can have some promotion uplift for a for future period, and then you have a marketing quantity that is being defaulted from your statistical forecast quantity and the stat forecast quantity. But now you have added some promotion as well, so you will have a marketing quantity without promotion as well as your with promotion, and you can have revenue based upon the marketing forecast quantity you got after promotion. Also using MLR algorithm, uh, we can have various independent variables like price or your brand sentiment in order to arrive at a mm, at an updated forecast number. I'll show you how that can be done. So a marketing person can utilize multiple linear regression approach. So basically these models are linear relationship between your dependent variable and one or more independent variable such as your price, temperature, or the brand sentiment. So the forecast depends upon the future values of this independent variable. So in this particular example, we have taken two independent variable, one price and other being your brand sentiment. So here we can see, if you see this particular graph, so you can see some spike after week 25. So basically after this period we have given a price discount, as a independent variable. So when you run multiple linear regression, it will take your history into consideration. It will take your independent variable, the price in this particular case, into consideration, and then it will give you your forecast number. So as you can see, during this period we have a price discount, so the demand get increases during this particular period. So this is how a marketing team can do uh, demand shaping activities. So next action they can take is to introduce a new product in order uh, to bridge the revenue gap for the next quarter. So since we are introducing new product, we can take a reference of already existing similar product which is having a good history. We can define the phase in and phase out period, basically at what time the forecasting for a new product will start and when it is going to end. So you have an app for manage product life cycle, so wherein you can define your reference product as well as the new product. You can assign multiple reference product depending upon the similarities that they have with the new product, and you can assign different weights to them, and you can see how the history of that particular product reference product is performed. You can create the dates, your forecast start dates, phase in and phase out date. So basically your phase in date defines the date from which the new product is sold onto the market, whereas your phase out start will define from which the product will be gradually taken out from the market. And you can also optionally put assign curves to your new product. So basically the curves will show you the expected demand development of your product during your phase in and phase out period that you have defined. So let me show you in the Excel view how the new product forecast looks like. So this is how you can see your new product and the reference product. So as you can see, we have history for our reference product, but we do not have any history for the new product. So based upon the history for our reference product, the forecasting algorithm will calculate the forecast for your new product. So here you're defined your phase in phase out curve, and you are given uh, the percentage time series for your curve, so that will get multiplied, and eventually you can see after a period of time your new product forecast will become similar to your reference product forecast. So now moving on to the next process, that is your consensus demand plan view. So here a demand planner can now look at the forecast value added analysis report to understand the recent performance trends for your statistical quantity, your sales quantity, marketing quantity against the actual that you have. So here in this view you have a consolidated list of your history. What was the history and what was the forecast that is being generated by the system? What was my uh, sales representative input? What was the sales manager input based upon the at an aggregated level? And what was the edit sales management can do? And what all the promotion uh, plan promotion or marketing team can do, and what all demands shaping activity that they can take to create more demand, like new product introduction or using MLR to do demand shaping. And then you can arrive at a consensus demand considering all this different stakeholders input. And then you can compare the consensus demand with the previous cycle, and you can compare the accuracy. Now this consensus demand would be your final output of your demand planning process that is being arrived at by taking uh, input from all the relevant stakeholders and considering all the aspect of the demand planning process. You can view the data that you have in Excel in terms of charts and the analytics, and then you can assign it to a dashboard. Like here you can create various charts, like you can compare, as I mentioned, we created interim key figures for different forecasting algorithms. So you can create a chart to compare different forecast model, how they are performing for a particular product, or you can assign different filters. You can check what was my consensus demand by a product group. You can check this at an aggregated level as well, but you also have an option to drill down and to look at an more granular level, what was the demand. So in this particular example, you have a consensus demand for a particular month for a product group. I want to see what was the contribution for each of the product in this particular product group for this particular month. So I can create a drill down onto that, and I can see the different products that comes under that product product group to see the contribution in terms of my consensus demand. You can have more level of drill down in order to see uh, uh, your data in a more granular level in terms of charts and the analytics. Also, you can compare your consensus demand versus sales forecast. You can see how your new product forecast is as compared to the reference product for which you have taken into account while forecasting. You can compare sense demand quantity with your consensus demand as well as your stat forecast quantity. Hope you would have understood how IBP can support your midterm demand planning part of SNOP process with its demand forecasting, demand shaping, and demand modeling capability. Now let's turn our focus to short-term demand sensing. I'll request my colleague Deep to take you through demand sensing showcase.
Thanks, Professor Ramesh and Ashish. So, as you can imagine, the sales and operations planning and the consensus demand planning process happens in a mid to long term planning horizons from years up to weeks, but it doesn't go to the daily granularity. Demand sensing truly recognizes the daily patterns in terms of the shipment data, the open orders, the point of sales data, and gives you a much more accurate short term demand for a horizon of 4 to 8 weeks. So let's understand how IBP does demand sensing. The first step is to create a snapshot key figure. So you can either create a traditional change history based snapshot key figure, or with the recently introduced capability, you can go to the manage lag based snapshot application, which creates a new snapshot key figure for you. So let's go into this application. I've already created a snapshot for consensus demand lag. So here you will see that my source key figure is my consensus demand without promotions. My periodicity is weekly and my target key figure is consensus demand lag. So my target key figure has a lag attribute attached to it. And the lags that we have chosen are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let us understand more about lag based snapshots. So for this product, my consensus demand is given in the table above. So now my lag 0 based snapshot will say what was my consensus demand for week 14 and week 14, which is 2984. My lag 1 snapshot will say what was my consensus demand in week 14 for week 15, which is 2849. Similarly, as we move on to lag 5, we say what was my consensus demand in week 14 for week 19, which is 3045. Let's have a look at this in the system. I can see that for week 14, my consensus demand is 2984, week 15, it's 2849. So my lag 1 snapshot for um, week 14 shows my consensus demand lag as 2849. Similarly, lag 2 shows as 1575, which is my consensus demand in week 16. So this gives me an idea what was my um, prediction of consensus demand for week 16 in week 14. So once we have configured these lag-based snapshot key figures, and when we have data for these key figures, we'll upload them as these are the key inputs for demand sensing. Once this is done, we'll create a forecast model for demand sensing. Let us look at the forecast model that we created for demand sensing and various settings associated with that model. So if you look at the periodicity of demand sensing, it's daily. We are taking 1 year worth of history and we are forecasting for the future 6 weeks. So if you go to the forecasting steps, you will see other inputs. The main input that we have used is requested quantity. We could have used confirmed quantity as an input to demand sensing, but that would also include our supplier constraints. And since we do not want to include supplier constraints right now, we have inputted requested quantity as the main input to demand sensing. If you look at the output, which is the target key figure for forecast, it's the sense demand quantity. Then you can include a new key figure calculation and create a new key figure called final consensus demand, which basically incorporates the sense demand quantity for for the short-term horizon, 6 weeks in our case, and the consensus demand for the long-term horizon after those 6 weeks. Before looking at further settings for demand sensing, let's understand the concept of effective historical horizon. So let's say our historical horizon is 52 weeks, and there's a formula to calculate the effective historical horizon, which is historical horizon minus the maximum of bias and open order horizon plus 2 times sensing horizon minus 1. So consider our case where our sensing horizon is 6 weeks, bias horizon is 5 weeks, and open order horizon is 8 weeks. So our effective historical horizon becomes 52 minus of maximum 5,8, which are the bias and open order horizons respectively, plus this 2 times 6 minus 1, and 6 is our sensing horizon. So effectively we only have 34 weeks of history, as the remaining 18 weeks are used for training the algorithm. So typically demand sensing is more useful for continuous data sets because that helps in better pattern recognition rather than intermittent data sets. So once we know that if our effective historical horizon is 34 weeks, and we want to make sure that we use the demand sensing algorithms only for those data points that are continuous, or those products that have continuous sales, you can specify the minimum data points key over here. The setting of 30 basically says that I have history for 30 of 34 weeks, which means that my product is rather continuous in terms of the sales history. There are various other settings that we have maintained, which I'll just skim through in the interest of time. So for example, the consensus forecast is the consensus demand without promotions key figure. The snapshot key figure that we are using is the consensus demand lagged, as we just saw. The future ordered quantity represents the open orders. The requested quantity represents all the historical quantity that had been requested. Delivered quantity represents the quantity that had been delivered. And notice over here that right now I haven't included any point of sales information. So once I save my model, let's just run demand sensing in the Excel. So before running sensing, I've run the start forecast best fit model and done various adjustments to come up with the consensus demand for these two products. So notice how all the inputs for demand sensing are stored in these key figures over here, like requested quantity, future ordered quantity, confirmed quantity, delivered quantity, and even the customer store sales quantity, which is the retail POS data, even though we aren't using it as of now. So now let's just run our demand sensing algorithm. The periodicity is daily, and I'll filter for my products. Now that our algorithm has run, let's just analyze the results. I've pulled in the sense demand quantity key figure over here. And over here, I see that for my product 27, which is pretty stable, my sense demand quantity is in the ballpark range of consensus demand, but the values are slightly different. So it might just happen that there is a very high bias that we have in lag phi, as a result of which demand sensing takes that into consideration and reduces the sense demand quantity for this week to incorporate for the high positive bias that we have. Now let's have a look at another product whose sales have recently picked up. So over here, if you see for product 29, the sales have recently picked up. It was like in the range of 2000, but for the past 3 weeks, the sales have increased quite rapidly. The requested quantity as well as the delivered quantity has been increased. So demand sensing picks up this trend, and if you see the consensus demand, it's in the range of 2000 to 3000. But if you look at the demand sensing picked up this trend of increase of requested quantity in the past 3 weeks and modified our quantity accordingly. So over here, the quantities are way off than the consensus demand, and in the ballpark range of 5,000 to 6,000. So this is one of the use cases of demand sensing, which takes into account the recent trends of open orders and takes that into consideration in order to give us a more accurate sense demand plan for the short-term planning horizon. So over here, if you can see, our consensus demand is a flat line, but demand sensing picks up the trends of open orders and gives us a higher forecast, which is more accurate given the recent trends that we have. Now let's have a look at another demand sensing model, which is basically the same model, but it has retail POS factored in it. So over here, the point of sales, I have modeled customer store sales quantity as the input for POS data for demand sensing. Let's see what impact it has on our result. Let's run the algorithm with the retail POS data. Filter for our products. Now that this algorithm has finished running, let's analyze our results. So for this product 27, if you look at the retail POS data, you will see that the sales are dying a little bit from 2,500 to around 1,600, and there's a steady decline in sales. So the demand sensing picks up this particular trend, and if you look at the sense demand quantity, the sense demand quantity has now reduced for some time periods to like 2,200, 1,800 and 2,100. So this is how the retail POS data is also taken as one of the key inputs to demand sensing. So these were just some of the use cases of demand sensing. Hope you guys now have a better idea of how demand sensing gives us a more accurate short-term forecast. I know we have covered a lot of ground, so let me now hand it over to Ashutosh for the wrap up.
Hello everyone, this is Ashutosh. So let me just try and wrap this up quickly for you. Thanks for hanging in there. I know we took a little bit longer. There's a lot of ground we needed to cover. So let me just have a couple slides here. So I just wanted to quickly remind everyone that we have detailed IBP demand and inventory bootcamps coming up on April 30th. So this will take place in SAP office in San Francisco Bay Area. All the information is here on this slide. We have 2 days of demand bootcamp on April 30th and May 1st, followed by 2 days of IBP inventory. And then we will, on Friday, May 4th, have a IBP practitioner day. We will play a supply chain simulation beer game, talk about implementation best practices, and also help benchmark your understanding of SAP IBP through an online test. So take a look at this in the handout section. You should also be able to download more details around this event. Any questions, just reach out to connect@GitaCloud.com. Also, for folks that are evaluating SAP IBP and would like to dive deeper on a self-paced basis, we do have a digital learning platform. And for example, recently the IBP response and supply workshop we did, showcasing all the recent 1802 features on both time series planning and order-based planning. The content is out there, available publicly. So if you would like, just go ahead, take a look. You can visit learning.gitacloud.com. Obviously, we have a very busy calendar over the next 6 months or so. We'll be doing similar webinars on IBP inventory and SNOP and other topics, as well as boot camps that we are undertaking. In India, for example, there's a platform and configuration boot camp coming up in July timeframe. We'll have a response supply boot camp back in San Francisco in September timeframe. So you can just go to gitacloud.com/events for the full event calendar and reach out to us if you would like to schedule half a day or a full day IBP workshop on your premises. If you are looking to understand the solution, more interested in taking it out on a test drive, we can do a quick 2-week, 3-week kind of POC with your data and showcase your requirements and scenarios in the solution. So reach out to us, stay connected. And at this point, I'd like to transition it back to Guinter to see if there are any questions. Guinter.
Hey, thanks, Ash. Great job again answering most of the questions parallel to the webinar. So I'd like to pick two of the remaining ones. First one's probably going to go to Todd. Which industries are a good fit for demand sensing?
Well, I would say that most industries can implement demand sensing. Again, I mentioned when I was talking about it that there are we have to look at what the effects of demand sensing would be. It's not really an industry thing as much as a company characteristics of your supply chain, right? So can you react to those things in a very near term? But from an actual uptake of companies that have shown interest in it, consumer products clearly, chemicals has looked into it, pharmaceutical companies. So there's a fairly broad range. We have even seen some in companies that have very long lead times for production because they are still distributing around and can react from a distribution network perspective. But the chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and consumer products are probably the leading industries that are really looking at doing demand sensing.
Okay, great, thank you. And then the second one, what are the prerequisites from a data perspective for an APO-DP customer to launch a demand sensing POC? Want to take that, Ash?
Yeah, I can, or Todd, you can also pitch in. We obviously look for customers to have historical snapshots and data that you have been, you require at least, say, 52 weeks worth of these historical snapshots. Obviously, we need granular open orders and some of the information around the promotions that you plan, so we are able to take out promotions from the history. In general, it's a maturity thing. We want to make sure that you have a stable consensus forecasting, demand forecasting process, and you have a requirement, you have the products which are continuous. That this obviously is not an intermittent demand pattern oriented solution. So we qualify to make sure both your demand patterns qualify for benefit from demand sensing and that you have the requisite data. And we do this through a half-a-day workshop of demand sensing readiness. Todd, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say just from a broader perspective, I mean, there's the demand sensing aspect of it, right? And then there's the, if you're an APO customer that would like to look at moving to IBP for demand, there are two choices. One is to continue doing your longer term forecasting in APO and then bring in the demand sensing, which Ashutosh was talking about. The other is to look at moving everything over to IBP for demand. And that might be a little bit of similar activities almost to the Dabur discussion earlier in this call is, are there some additional algorithms and things in IBP for demand that might benefit you? The other piece is that as you look at a consensus demand planning process, oftentimes we find that companies that are using APO don't have huge buy-in from people like sales or marketing to put their input into APO. Whereas sometimes a move to IBP can help facilitate that. So there's a couple different ways you can do it is the way I would look at it. And as Ashutosh talked about, there's some data that you need if you want to look at demand sensing. But in general, the whole move from APO to IBP is something you could also look at.
Great, and I'd actually like to add something as well. As you mentioned that the company should have a good S&OP process. Well, if you don't have that, we're happy to help, and we've got the industry experience to get you there. All right, before we end, please fill out the exit survey as it pops up when you leave the webinar. And then before that, probably download the Demand Bootcamp invite from the handout section. So that's available for you there. And the recording will be available soon and emailed to you. So with that, thank you very much for everybody for sharing 2 hours with us here today. This was an action-packed webinar, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.